see one person. And we're just waiting for Steven. Hopefully Steven will be here any second. Looks like this manservant is jealous and having private conversations with the guy that Cloth suspects is trying to poison his mayor guy. So we left off with him seeing them having a private conversation. And it didn't look good. Steven, where are you? He knows. I'm gonna tag him though, just in case he lost track of time or something. Oh, there. Okay, there he is. Cool. Okay, I'm started. Chapter 64, Flight. Though no family can boast a truly peaceful past, the Lacklesses have been especially ripe with misfortune. Some from without: assassination, invasion, peasant revolt, and theft. More telling is misfortune that comes from within. How can a family thrive when the eldest heir forsakes all family duty? Small wonder they are often called the luckless by their detractors. It seems a testament to the strength of their blood that they have survived so much for so long. Indeed, if not for the burning of Caloptena, we might possess records tracking the Lackless family back far enough for them to rival the royal line of Modig in its antiquity. This is text from the book he's reading, in case that's not obvious. I tossed the book onto the table in a way that would have made Master Loren spit blood. If the mayor thought this sort of information was enough to woo a woman, he was in worse need of my help than he thought. But as things currently stood, I doubted the mayor would be asking me for any help with anything, least of all something as sensitive as his courting. Yesterday he hadn't summoned me to his rooms at all. I was clearly out of favor, and I sensed Stapes had a hand in it. Given what I had seen 2 nights ago in Codicus's tower, it was fairly obvious Stapes was part of the conspiracy to poison the mayor. Though it meant spending all day trapped in my rooms, I stayed where I was. I knew better than to jeopardize Alvaron's already low opinion of me by approaching him without being summoned first. An hour before lunch, Viscount Gehrman stopped by my rooms with a few pages of handwritten gossip. He also brought a deck of cards, apparently thinking to take a page from Braden's book. He offered to teach me how to play thrush, and as I was just learning the game, agreed to play for the pittance of a single silver bit per hand. He made the mistake of letting me deal, and left in a bit of a huff after I won 18 hands in a row. I suppose I could have been more subtle. I could have played him like a fish on a line and biked him for half his estate, but I was in no mood for it. My thoughts were not pleasant, and I preferred to be alone with them. An hour after lunch, I decided I was no longer interested in currying favor with the mayor. If Alvaron wished to trust his treacherous manservant, that was his business. I'd be damned if I would spend one more minute sitting idle in my room, waiting by the door like a whipped dog. I threw on my cloak, grabbed my loot case, and decided to take a walk down Tinnery Street. If the mayor needed me while I was away, he could damn well leave a note. I was halfway into the hall when I saw the guard standing at attention outside my door. He was one of Alvaron's own, clad in sapphire and ivory. We stood for a moment, motionless. There was no sense in asking if he was there on my account. Mine was the only door for 20 feet in any direction. I met his eye. "And you are?" "Jays, sir." At least I still rated a sir. That was worth something. "And you're here because—" I'm to accompany you if you leave your room, sir." "Right." I stepped back into my room and closed the door behind me. Were his orders from Alvaron or Stapes? It didn't really matter. I went out my window, into the garden, over the little streamlet, behind a hedgerow, and up a section of decorative stone wall. My burgundy cloak was not the best color for sneaking around in the garden, but it worked quite nicely against the red of the roofing tiles. After that I made my way onto the roof of the stables, through a hayloft, and out the back door of a disused barn. From there it was just a matter of jumping a fence, and I was off the mayor's estate. Simple. I stopped at 12 Inns on Tinnery Street before I found the one where Denna was staying. She wasn't there, so I continued along the street, keeping my eyes open and trusting to my luck. I spotted her an hour later. She was standing at the edge of a crowd, watching a street corner production of believe it or not, the three pennies for wishing. Her skin was darker than when I'd seen her last at the university, tanned from travel, and she wore a high-necked dress after the local fashion. Her dark hair fell in a straight sheaf across her back, all except a single slender braid that hung close to her face. I caught her eye just as Dead Nettle shouted out his first line in the play. "I've cures for what ails you. My wares never fails you. I've potions for pennies, results guaranteed, so if you've got a dicky heart, or can't get her legs apart, come straight away to my cart. You'll find what you need." Denna smiled when she saw me. We might have stayed for the play, but I already knew the ending. Hours later, Denna and I were eating sweet vintage grapes in the shadow of the sheer. Some industrious stonesman had carved a shallow niche into the white stone of the cliff, making smooth seats of stone. It was a cozy place we had discovered while walking aimlessly through the city. We were alone, and I felt myself to be the luckiest man in the world. My only regret was that I didn't have her ring with me. It would have been the perfect unexpected gift to go with our unexpected meeting. Worse yet, I couldn't even tell Denna about it. If I did, I'd be forced to admit that I'd used it as collateral for my loan with Devi. "You seem to be doing fairly well for yourself," Denna said, rubbing the edge of my burgundy cloak between her fingers. "Have you given up the bookish life?" "Taking a vacation," I hedged. "Right now I'm assisting the Mayor Alvaron with a thing or two." Her eyes widened appreciatively. "Do tell." I looked away uncomfortably. "I'm afraid I can't. Delicate matters and all that." I cleared my throat and tried to change the subject. "What of you? You seem to be doing fairly well yourself." I brushed 2 fingers across the embroidery that decorated the high neck of her dress. "Well, I'm not rubbing elbows with the mayor," she said, making an exaggerated deferential gesture in my direction. "But as I mentioned in my letters, Letters?" I asked. "You sent more than one?" She nodded. 3 since I left," she said. "I was about to send a 4th, but you've saved me the trouble." "I only got the 1, I said. Denna shrugged. "I'd rather tell you in person anyway." She paused dramatically. "I finally have my formal patronage." "You have?" I said, delighted. "Denna, that's wonderful news." Denna grinned proudly. Her teeth were white against the light nut color of her travel-tanned face. Her lips, as always, were red without the aid of any paint. "Is he part of the court here in Severin?" I asked. "What's his name?" Denna's grin faded into a serious look, a confused smile playing around her mouth. "You know I can't tell you that," she chided. "You know how closely he guards his privacy." My excitement fell away, leaving me cold. "Oh, no, Denna, it's not the same fellow as before, is it? The one who sent you to play for that wedding in Trebon?" Denna looked puzzled. "Of course it is. I can't tell you his real name. What was it you called him before? Master Elm?" "Master Ash," I said, and it felt like a mouthful of ashes when I said it. "Do you at least know his real name? Did he tell you that much before you signed up?" "I expect I know his real name," she shrugged, running a hand through her hair. When her fingers touched the braid, she seemed surprised to find it there and quickly began to unravel it, her deft fingers smoothing it away. "Even if I don't, what does it matter? Everyone has secrets, Cloth. I don't particularly care what his are, so as long as he continues to deal square with me. He's been very generous." "He's not just secretive, Denna," I protested. "From the way you've described him, I'd say he's either paranoid or tangled up in dangerous business." "I don't know why you're carrying such a grudge against him." I couldn't believe she could say that. "Denna, he beat you senseless." She went very still. "No." Her hand went to the fading bruise on her cheek. "No, he didn't. I told you, I fell while I was out riding. The stupid horse couldn't tell a stick from a snake." I shook my head. "I'm talking about last fall in Trebon." Denna's hand fell back to her lap, where it made an absent-minded fidgeting gesture, trying to toy with a ring that wasn't there. She looked at me, her expression blank. "How did you know about that?" "You told me yourself, that night on the hill, waiting for the Dracus to come." She looked down, blinking. I don't remember saying that." "You were a little addled at the time," I said gently. "But you did. You told me all about it. Denna, you shouldn't have to stay with someone like that. Anyone who could do that to you." "He did it for my own good," she said, her dark eyes beginning to flicker with anger. "Did I tell you that? There I was without a scratch on me, and everyone else at the wedding dead as leather. You know what small towns are like. Even after they found me unconscious, they thought I might have had something to do with it. You remember." I put my head down and shook it like an ox worrying its yoke. "I don't believe it. There had to be another way around the situation. I would have found another way." "Well, I guess we can't all be as clever as you," she said. "Clever doesn't have anything to do with it." I came close to shouting. He could have taken you away with him. He could have come forward and vouched for you. He couldn't let anyone know he was there, Dennis said. He said, he beat you. And as I spoke the words, I felt a terrible anger come together inside me. It wasn't hot and furious as some of my flashes of temper tend to be. This was different, slow and cold. And as soon as I felt it, I realized it had been there inside me for a long while, crystallizing like a pond slowly freezing solid over a long winter night. He beat you, I said again, and I could feel it inside, a solid block of icy anger. Nothing you can say will change that, and if I ever see him, I'll likely stick a knife in him rather than shake his hand. Denna looked up at me, then, the irritation fading from her face. She gave me a look that was all sweet fondness and mingled pity. It was the sort of look you give a puppy when it growls, thinking itself terribly fierce. She put her hand gently on the side of my face, and I felt myself flush hot and hard, suddenly embarrassed by my own melodrama. "Can we not argue about it?" she asked. "Please? Not today? It's been so long since I've seen you." I decided to let it go rather than risk driving her away. I knew what happened when men pressed her too hard. "Fair enough," I said. "For today. Can you at least tell me what sort of thing your patron brought you out here for?" Denna leaned back in her seat, smiling a wide smile. "Sorry, delicate matters and all that," she mimicked. "Don't be that way," I protested. "I'd tell you if I could, but the mayor values his privacy very highly." Denna leaned forward again to lay her hand over mine. "Poor Kvoth. It's not out of spite. My patron is at least as private as the mayor. He made it very clear that things would go badly if I ever made our relationship public. He was quite emphatic about it." Her expression had gone serious. "He's a powerful man." She seemed as if she would say more, then stopped herself. I don't know where the cat is. I think it's because, right before I started, I was carrying him around and being very smothery with him. So he's probably, trying to avoid me right now. Though I didn't want to, I understood. My recent brush with the mayor's anger had taught me caution. "What can you tell me about him?" Denna tapped a finger against her lips thoughtfully. "He's a surprisingly good dancer. I think I can say that without betraying anything. He's quite graceful," she said, then laughed at my expression. "I'm doing some research for him, looking into old genealogies and histories. He's helping me write a couple songs so I can make a name for myself." She hesitated, then shook her head. "I think that's all I can say." "Will I get to hear the songs after you're done?" She gave a shy smile. "I think that can be arranged." She leapt to her feet and grabbed my arm to pull me to my feet. "Enough talking. Come and walk with me." I smiled, her enthusiasm as infectious as a child's. But when she pulled at my hand, she let out a tiny yelp, flinching and pressing one of her hands to her side. I was standing next to her in a second. "What's the matter?" Dennis shrugged and gave me a brittle smile, holding her arm close to her ribs. "My fall," she said. "That stupid horse. I get a twinge when I forget and move too quickly." "Has anyone looked at it?" "It's just a bruise," she said, "and the sort of doctor I can afford I wouldn't trust to touch me." "What of your patron?" I asked. "Certainly he could arrange something." She slowly straightened. "It's really not a problem." She lifted her arms above her head and made a quick, clever dance step, then laughed at my serious expression. "No more talk of secret things for now. Come walk with me. Tell me dark and lurid gossip from the mayor's court." "Very well," I said as we began to walk. "I've heard the mayor is marvelously recovered from a long-standing illness." "You're a poor rumor-monger," she said. "Everyone knows that." "The Baronet Bramston played a disastrous deck of faro last night." Denna rolled her eyes. "Boring." "The Comtesse de Fer lost her virginity while attending a performance of Dionica." "Oh!" Denna raised her hand to her mouth, stifling a laugh. "Did she really?" She certainly didn't have it with her after the intermission," I said in a hushed voice, "but it turns out she had just left it behind in her rooms. It rolled underneath a chest of drawers." Denna's expression turned indignant. "I can't believe I believed you." She swatted at me, then grimaced again, sucking a sharp breath through her teeth. "You know," I said softly, "I've been trained at the university. I'm not a physicker, but the medicine I know is good. I could take a look at it for you." Am I back? I don't know where it stopped. I'm just going to go back a little bit. Unless you guys tell me. Okay. I think usually when this happens, it doesn't, I don't, not too much gets missed, so I think going back one paragraph should be good. So they're talking about rumors, or she's asking him about rumors. I'll start from, "Very well," I said as we began to walk. "I've heard the mayor is marvelously recovered from a long-standing illness." "You're a poor rumor-monger," she said. "Everyone knows that. The Baronet Bramston played a disastrous deck of faro last night." Jenna rolled her eyes. "Boring." "The Comtesse de Fer lost her virginity while attending a performance of Dionica." "Oh!" Jenna raised her hand to her mouth, stifling a laugh. "Did she really?" "She certainly didn't have it with her after the intermission," I said in a hushed voice. "But it turns out she had just left it behind in her rooms, so it was merely misplaced, not really lost. The servants found it 2 days later when they were cleaning up. Turns out it had rolled underneath a chest of drawers." Jenna's expression turned indignant. "I can't believe I believed you." She swatted at me, then grimaced again, sucking a sharp breath through her teeth. "You know," I said softly, "I've been trained at the university. I'm not a physicker, but the medicine I know is good. I could take a look at it for you." She gave me a long look, as if she wasn't quite sure what to make of my offer. "I think," she said at last, "that might be the most circumspect route anyone has ever tried for getting me out of my clothes." I felt myself blush furiously. "I didn't mean—" Denna laughed at my discomfiture. "If I let anyone play doctor with me, it would be you, my cloth," she said. "But I'll tend to it for now." She linked arms with me, and we continued our walk down the street. "I know enough to take care of myself." I returned to the mayor's estate hours later, taking the direct route rather than come in over the rooftops. When I arrived in the hallway leading to my room, I found 2 guards standing there instead of the single one that had been waiting before. I guessed they had discovered my escape. Even this couldn't dampen my spirits overmuch, as the time I'd spent with Denna had left me feeling 12 feet tall. Better yet, I was meeting with her tomorrow to go riding. Having a specific time and place to meet was an unexpected treat where Denna was concerned. "Good evening, gentlemen," I said as I came out down the hall. "Anything interesting happen while I was out?" "You're to be confined to your rooms," Jays said grimly. I noticed he left off the "sir" this time. I paused with my hand on the doorknob. "Beg pardon?" "You're to remain in your rooms until we get further orders," he said, "and one of us is to stay with you at all times." I felt my temper flare up. "And does Alvaron know about this?" I asked sharply. They looked at each other uncertainly. It was Stapes giving the orders then. That uncertainty would be enough to keep them from laying hands on me. "Let's get this sorted out straight away," I said, and started down the hall at a brisk walk, leaving the guards to catch up with me, their armor clattering. My temper fanned itself hotter as I made my way through the halls. If my credibility with the mayor was truly ruined, I preferred to have done with it now. If I couldn't have the mayor's goodwill, I would at least have my freedom and the ability to see Denna when I wished. I turned the corner just in time to see the mayor emerging from his rooms. He looked as healthy as I had ever seen him, carrying a sheaf of papers under one arm. As I approached, irritation flashed across his face, and I thought he might simply have the guards carry me away. Nevertheless, I approached him as boldly as if I had a written invitation. "Your Grace," I said with cheery cordiality, "might we talk for a moment?" "Certainly," he replied in a similar tone as he swung open the door he had been about to close behind himself. "Do come in." I watched his eyes. There's the cat. There he is. Yeah, you giving a little meow too to the camera? You gonna say hi to everybody? I watched his eyes and saw an anger as hot as mine. A small, sensible part of me quailed, but my temper had the bit in its teeth and was galloping madly ahead. I just want to make sure I haven't seen any comments. Just let me know that if you guys are still here, let me know. I want to make sure that, nothing weird happened with my connection. We left the bemused guards in the antechamber, and Alvaron led me through the second set of doors into his personal rooms. Silence hung dangerous in the air, like the calm before a sudden summer storm. "I cannot believe your impudence," the mayor hissed once the doors were closed. "Your wild accusations, your ridiculous claims. I mislike public unpleasantness, so we will deal with this later." He made an imperious gesture. "Return to your rooms and do not leave until I decide how best to deal with you." "Your Grace—" I could tell by the set of his shoulders that he was ready to call the guards. "I do not hear you," he said flatly. He met my gaze then. His eyes were hard as flint, and I saw how angry he truly was. This wasn't the anger of a patron or employer. It wasn't someone irritated by my failure to respect the social order. This was a man who had ruled everything around him from the age of 16. This man thought nothing of hanging someone from an iron gibbet to make a point. This was a man who, but for a twist of history, would now be king of all Ventus. My temper sputtered and went out like a snuffed candle, leaving me chilled. I realized then that I had just misjudged my situation, badly. When I was a child, homeless on the streets of Tarbean, I'd learned to deal with dangerous people. Drunken dock workers, guardsmen, even a homeless child with a bottle-glass knife can kill you. The key to staying safe was knowing the rules of the situation. A guard wouldn't beat you in the middle of the street. A dock worker wouldn't chase you if you ran. Now, with sudden clarity, I realized my mistake. The mayor was not bound by any rules. He could order me killed then, hang my body over the city gates. He could throw me in jail and forget about me. He could leave me there while I grew starved and sickly. I had no position, no friends to intercede on my behalf. I was helpless as a child with a willow-switch sword. I realized this in a flash and felt a gnawing fear settle in my belly. I should have stayed in Severn Low while I had the chance. I never should have come here in the first place and meddled in the affairs of powerful folk such as this. It was just then that Stapes bustled in from the mayor's dressing room. Seeing us, his normally placid expression flickered briefly into panic and surprise. He recovered quickly. "I beg your pardon, sirs," he said, and hurried back the way he came. "Stapes," the master called out before he could leave. "Come here." Stapes slunk back into the room. He wrung his hands nervously. His face had the stricken look of a guilty man, a man caught in the midst of something dishonest. Alvaron's voice was stern. "Stapes, what do you have there?" Looking closer, I saw the manservant wasn't wringing his hands. He was clutching something. "It's nothing." "Stapes!" the mayor barked. "How dare you lie to me? Show me at once." Numbly, the portly manservant opened his hands. A tiny gem-bright bird lay lifeless on his palm. His face had lost all hint of color. Never in the history of the world has the death of a lovely thing brought such relief and joy. I had been certain of Stapes' betrayal for days now, and here was the unquestionable proof of it. Nevertheless, I kept quiet. The mayor had to see this with his own eyes. What is the meaning of this?" the mayor asked slowly. "It's not good to think of such things, sir," the manservant said quickly, "and worse to dwell on them. I'll just fetch another one. It'll sing just as sweet." There was a long pause. I could see Alvaron struggling to contain the rage he'd been ready to unleash on me. The silence continued to stretch. "Stapes," I said slowly, "how many birds have you replaced these last few days?" Stapes turned to me, his expression indignant. Before he could speak, the mayor broke in. "Answer him, Stapes." His voice sounded almost choked. "Has there been more than this one?" Stapes gave the mayor a stricken look. "Oh, Rand, I didn't want to trouble you. You were so bad for a time. Then you asked for the birds and had that terrible night. Then the next day one of them died." Looking down at the tiny bird in his hand, he spoke faster and faster, his words almost tumbling over each other, too clumsy to be anything but sincere. "I didn't want to fill your head with talk of dying things, so I snuck it out and brought a new one in. Then you kept getting better, and they started falling 4 or 5 a day. Every time I looked, there would be another one lying in the bottom of the cage like a little cut flower. But you were doing so well, I didn't want to mention it." Stapes covered the dead Sipquick with a cupped hand. "It's like they were giving up their little souls to make you well again." Something inside the man suddenly gave way, and he began to cry. The deep, hopeless sobs of an honest man who has been frightened and helpless for a long time, watching the slow death of a well-loved friend. Alvaron stood motionless for a stunned moment, all the anger spilling out of him. Then he moved to put his arms gently around his manservant. "Oh, Stapes," he said softly. "They were, in a way. You haven't done anything you can be blamed for." I quietly left the room and busied myself removing the feeders from the gilded cage. An hour later, the 3 of us were eating a quiet supper together in the mayor's rooms. Alvaron and I told Stapes what had been happening over the last several days. Stapes was almost giddy, both at his master's health and at the knowledge it would continue to improve. As for myself, after suffering a few days under Alvaron's displeasure, being so suddenly in his good graces again was a relief. Nevertheless, I was shaken by how close to disaster I had been. I was honest with the mayor about my misguided suspicion of Stapes, and I offered the manservant my sincere apology. Stapes, in turn, admitted his doubts about me. In the end, we shook hands and thought much better of each other. As we were chatting over the last bites of supper, Stapes perked up, excused himself, and hurried out. "My outer door," the mayor explained. "He has ears like a dog. It's uncanny." Stapes opened the door to admit the tall man with the shaven head who had been looking over maps with Alvaron when I'd first arrived, Commander Dagon. As Dagon stepped into the room, his eyes flicked to each of the corners, to the window, to the other door, briefly over me, then back to the mare. When his eyes touched mine, all the deep feral instincts that had kept me alive on the streets of Tarbean told me to run, hide, do anything so long as it took me far away from this man. "Ah, Dagon," the mare said cheerily. "Are you well this fine day?" "Yes, your grace." He stood attentively, not quite meeting the mare's eye. "Would you be good enough to arrest Codicus for treason?" There was a half-heartbeat pause. "Yes, your grace." 8 men should be sufficient, providing they're not likely to panic in a complicated situation. "Yes, your grace." I began to sense subtle differences in Dagon's responses. "Alive," Alvaron responded, as if answering a question. "But you needn't be gentle." "Yes, your grace." With that, Dagon turned to leave. I spoke up quickly. "Your grace, if he's truly an arcanist, you ought to take certain precautions." I regretted the word ought as soon as I had said it. Ought was presumptuous. I should have said, you may wish to consider taking certain precautions. Alvaron seemed to take no notice of my misstep. "Yes, of course. Set a thief to catch a thief. Dagon, before you settle him downstairs, bind him hand and foot with good iron chain. Pure iron, mind you. Gag and blindfold him." He thought for a brief moment, tapping his lips with a finger. "And cut off his thumbs." "Yes, your grace." Alvaron looked at me. "Do you think that should be sufficient?" I fought down a wave of nausea and forced myself not to wring my hands in my lap. I didn't know which I found more unsettling, the cheerful tone with which Alvaron delivered the commands, or the flat, emotionless one with which Dagon accepted them. A full arcanist was nothing to trifle with, but I found the thought of crippling the man's hands more horrifying than killing him outright. Dagon left, and after the door closed, Stapes shuddered. "Good Lord, Rand, he's like cold water down the back of my neck. I wish you'd get rid of him." The mayor laughed. "So someone else could have him? No, Stapes, I want him right here. My mad dog on a short leash." Stapes frowned, but before he could make anything more of it, his eyes were drawn through the doorway into the sitting room. "Oh, there's another one." He walked to the cage and returned with another dead flit, holding its tiny body tenderly as he carried it out of the chambers. "I know you need to test the medicine on something," he said from the other room, "but it's a little rough on the poor little Calanthus." "Beg pardon?" I asked. "Our Stapes is old-fashioned," Alvaron explained with a smile, "and more educated than he cares to admit. Calanthus is the Eld Vintic name for them." I could swear I've heard that word somewhere else. "It's also the surname of the royal line of Vintus," Alvaron said chidingly. "For someone who knows so much, you're curiously blind in places." Stapes craned his neck to look toward the cage again. "I know you had to do it," he said, "but why not use mice, or Comtesse de Fer's nasty little dog?" Before I could answer, there was a thump from the outer rooms, and a guard burst through the inner door before Stapes could come to his feet. "Your Grace," the man said breathlessly as he jumped to the room's only window and slammed the shutters. Next he ran to the sitting room and did the same with the window in there. There followed other, similar noises from rooms farther back I had never seen. There was a faint sound of furniture being moved. Stapes looked puzzled and half rose to his feet, but the mayor shook his head and motioned for him to sit down. "Lieutenant," he called out, a tinge of irritation in his voice. "Beg pardon, your Grace," the guard said as he re-entered the room, breathing heavily. "Dagon's orders. I was to secure your rooms straight away." "I'll take it all is not well," Alvaron said dryly. "There was no answer from the tower when we knocked. Dagon had us force the door. There was... I know not what it was, your Grace. Some malignant spirit. Anders is dead, your Grace. Codicus is nowhere in his rooms, but Dagon is after him." Alvaron's expression darkened. "Damn!" he thundered, striking the arm of his chair with a fist. His brow furrowed, and he let out an explosive sigh. "Very well." He waved the guard away. The guard stood stiffly. "Sir, Dagon said I'm not to leave you unguarded." Alvaron gave him a dangerous look. "Very well, but stand over there." He pointed to the corner of the room. The guard appeared perfectly happy to fade into the background. Alvaron leaned forward, pressing the tips of his fingers to his forehead. "How in the name of God did he suspect?" The question seemed rhetorical, but it set the wheels of my mind spinning. "Did your Grace pick up his medicine yesterday?" Yes, I did everything the same as I had done in days past." "Except you didn't send me to get your medicine," I thought to myself. "Do you still have the vial?" I asked. He did. Stapes brought it to me. I uncorked it and ran a finger along the inside of the glass. "How does your Grace's medicine taste?" "I've told you. Brackish. Bitter." I watched the mayor's eyes go wide as I brought my finger to my mouth and touched it lightly to the tip of my tongue. "Are you mad?" Alvaron said incredulously. "Sweet," I said simply. Then I rinsed my mouth with water and spat it as delicately as possible into an empty glass. I took a small folded packet of paper from a pocket in my vest, shook a small amount into my hand, and ate it, grimacing. "What's that?" Stapes asked. "Llewellyn," I lied, knowing the real answer, charcoal, would only provoke more questions. I took a mouthful of water and spat it out as well. This time it was black, and Alvaron and Stapes stared at it, startled. I bowled ahead. "Something must have made him suspect you were not taking your medicine, Your Grace. If it suddenly tasted different, you would have asked him." The mayor nodded. "I saw him yesterday evening. He asked after my health." He beat his fist softly onto the arm of his chair. "All the cursed luck. If he has any wit, he's been gone half a day. We'll never catch him." I thought about reminding him that if he had believed me from the first, and none of this would have happened, then thought better of it. "I'd advise your men to stay out of his tower, Your Grace. He's had time to prepare a great deal of mischief in there, traps and the like." The mayor nodded and passed his hand in front of his eyes. "Yes, of course. See to it, Stapes. I believe I'll take a bit of rest. This business may take a while to sort out." I gathered myself to leave, but the mayor gestured me back into my seat. "Kvoth, stay a moment and make me a pot of tea before you go." Stapes rang for servants. While clearing the remains of our lunch away, they glanced at me curiously. Not only sitting in the mayor's presence, I was sharing a meal with him in his private chambers. This news would be rumored through the estate in under 10 minutes. Oh, yeah, that's what I was picturing too, like all these booby traps inside. I kind of want to see that. After the servants left, I made the mayor another pot of tea. I was preparing to leave when he spoke over the top of his cup, too softly for the guard to overhear. "Kvoth, you have proved perfectly trustworthy, and I regret any doubts I briefly entertained about you." He sipped and swallowed before continuing. "Unfortunately, I cannot allow news of a poisoning to spread, especially with the poisoner escaped." He gave me a significant look. "It would interfere with the matter we discussed before." I nodded. Widespread knowledge that his own arcanist had nearly killed him would hardly help Alvaron win the hand of the woman he hoped to marry. He continued, "Unfortunately, this need for silence also precludes my giving you a reward a reward you all too richly deserve. Were the situation different, I would consider the gift of lands mere token thanks. I would grant you title, too. This power my family still retains, free from the controlment of the king." My head reeled at the implication of what the mayor was saying as he continued. "However, if I were to do such a thing, there would be need of explanation, and an explanation is the one thing I cannot afford." Alvaron extended his hand, and it took me a moment to realize he intended me to shake it. One does not typically shake hands with the mayor, Alvaron. I immediately regretted that the only person present to see it was the guard. I hoped he was a gossip. I took his hand solemnly, and Alvaron continued, "I owe you a great debt. If you ever find yourself in need, you shall have at your command all the help a grateful lord can lend." I nodded graciously, trying to keep a calm demeanor despite my excitement. This was exactly what I had been hoping for. With the mayor's resources, I could make a concerted search for the emir. He could get me access to church archives, private libraries, places where important documents hadn't been pruned and edited as they had in the university. But I knew this wasn't the proper time to ask. Alvaron had promised his help. I could simply bide my time and chose what type of help I wanted most. As I stepped outside the mayor's rooms, Stapes surprised me with a sudden, wordless embrace. The expression on his face couldn't have been more grateful if I'd pulled his family from a burning building. "Young sir, I doubt you understand how much I'm in your debt. If there's anything you ever need, just make me wise of it." He gripped my hand, pumping it up and down enthusiastically. At the same time, I felt him press something into my palm. Then I was standing in the hallway. I opened my hand and saw a fine silver ring with Stapes' name etched across the face. Alongside it was a second ring that wasn't metal at all. It was smooth and white, and also had the manservant's name carved in rough letters across the surface of it. I had no idea what such a thing might signify. I made my way back to my rooms, almost dizzy with my sudden fortune. Alright, chapter 65. A Beautiful Game. The next day, my meager belongings were moved to rooms the mayor deemed more suitable for someone firmly in his favor. There were 5 of them in all, 3 with windows overlooking the garden. It was a nice gesture, but I couldn't help but think that these rooms were even farther from the kitchens. My food would be cold as a stone by the time it made its way to me. I'd barely been there an hour before a runner arrived bearing Braden's silver ring and a card that read, "Your glorious new rooms. When?" I turned the card over, wrote, "As soon as you like," and sent the boy on his way. I placed his silver ring on a tray in my sitting room. The bowl next to it now had 2 silver rings glittering among the iron. I opened the door to see Braden's dark eyes peering owlishly out at me from the halo of his white beard and hair. He smiled and bowed, his walking stick tucked under one arm. I offered him a seat, then excused myself politely and let him alone in the sitting room for a moment, as was the gracious thing to do. I was barely through the doorway before I heard his rich laugh coming from the other room. "Ho, ho!" he said. Now there's a thing!" When I returned, Braden was sitting by the talk board holding the 2 rings I had recently received from Stapes. It's like, DoorDash for back then. "This certainly took a turn for the books," he said. "Apparently I misjudged things yesterday when my runner was turned away from your door by an altogether surly guard." I grinned at him. "It's been an exciting couple of days," I said. Braden tucked his chin and chuckled, looking even more owlish than usual. "I dare say," he said, holding up the silver ring. "This tells quite a story, but this—" he gestured to the white ring with his walking stick. "This is something else entirely." I pulled up a seat across from him. "I'll be frank with you," I said. "I can only guess what it's made of, let alone what it signifies." Braden raised an eyebrow. "That's remarkably forthright of you." I shrugged. "I feel somewhat more secure in my position here," I admitted. "Enough that I can be a little less guarded with the people who have been kind to me." He chuckled again as he laid the silver ring on the board. "Secure," he said. "I dare say you are at that." He picked up the white ring. "Still, it's not odd that you wouldn't know about this." "I thought there were just 3 types of rings," I said. "That's true for the most part," Braden said, "but the giving of rings goes back quite a ways. The common folk were doing it long before it became a game for the gentry, and while Stapes may breathe the rarefied air with the rest of us, his family is undeniably common." Braden set the white ring back onto the board and folded his hands over it. "Those rings were made of things ordinary folk might find easily at hand. A young lover might give a ring of new green grass to someone he was courting. A ring of leather promises service, and so on." "And a ring of horn?" "A ring of horn shows enmity," Braden said. "Powerful and lasting enmity." "Ah," I said, somewhat taken aback. "I see." Braden smiled and held the pale ring up to the light. "But this," he said, "is not horn. The grain is wrong, and Stapes would never give a horn ring alongside a silver one." He shook his head. "No. Unless I miss my guess, this is a ring of bone." He handed it to me. "Wonderful," I said glumly, turning it over in my hands. "And that means what? That he'll stab me in the liver and push me down a dry well?" Braden gave me his wide, warm smile. "A ring of bone indicates a profound and lasting debt." "I see." I rubbed it in between my fingers. "I have to say I prefer being owed a favor." "Not just a favor," Braden said. "Traditionally, a ring such as this is carved from the bone of a deceased family member." He raised an eyebrow. "And while I doubt that is currently the case, it does get the point across." I looked up, still slightly dazed by it all. "And that is?" "That these things are not given lightly. It's not a part of games the gentry play, and not the sort of ring you should display." He gave me a look. "If I were you, I'd tuck it safe away." I put it carefully into my pocket. "You've been such help," I said. "I wish I could repay—" He held up a hand, cutting me off mid-sentence. Then, moving with solemn care, he pointed one finger downward, made a fist, and rapped a knuckle on the surface of the talk board. I smiled and brought out the stones. "I think I'm finally getting my teeth into the game," I said an hour later after losing by the narrowest of margins. Braden pushed his chair away from the table with an expression of distaste. "No," he said, "quite the opposite. You have the basics, but you're missing the whole point." I began to sort out the stones. "The point is that I'm finally close to beating you after all this time." "No," Braden said, "that's not it at all. Talk is a subtle game. That's the reason I have such trouble finding people who can play it. Right now you are stomping about like a thug. If anything, you're worse than you were 2 days ago." "Admit it," I said. "I nearly had you that last time." He merely scowled and pointed imperiously to the table. I set to it with a will, smiling and humming, sure that today I would finally beat him. But nothing could be further from the truth. Braden set his stones ruthlessly, not a breath of hesitation between his moves. He tore me apart as easily as you rip a sheet of paper in half. The game was over so quickly it left me breathless. "Again," Braden said, a note of command in his voice I'd never heard before. I tried to rally, but the next game was worse. I felt like a puppy fighting a wolf. No, I was a mouse at the mercy of an owl. There was not even the pretense of a fight. All I could do was run. But I couldn't run fast enough. This game was over sooner than the last. Again, he demanded. And we played again. This time I was not even a living thing. Braden was calm and dispassionate as a butcher with a boning knife. The game lasted about the length of time it takes to gut and bone a chicken. At the end of it, Braden frowned and shook his hands briskly to both sides of the board as if he had just washed them and was trying to flick them dry. "Fine," I said, leaning back in my chair. "I take your point. You've been going easy on me." "No," Braden said with a grim look. "That is far gone from the point I am trying to make." "What, then?" "I'm trying to make you understand the game," he said. "The entire game, not just the fiddling about with stones. The point is not to play as tight as you can. The point is to be bold, to be dangerous, be elegant." He tapped the board with 2 fingers. "Any man that's half awake can spot a trap that's laid for him, but to stride in boldly with a plan to turn it on its ear, that is a marvelous thing." He smiled without any of the grimness leaving his face. "To set a trap and know someone will come in wary, ready with a trick of their own, then beat them. That is twice marvelous." Braden's expression softened, and his voice became almost like an entreaty. "Talk reflects the subtle turning of the world. It's a mirror we hold to life. No one wins a dance, boy. The point of dancing is the motion that a body makes. A well-played game of talk reveals the moving of a mind. There is a beauty to these things for those with eyes to see it." He gestured at the brief and brutal lay of stones between us. "Look at that. Why would I ever want to win a game such as this?" I looked down at the board. "The point isn't to win?" I asked. "The point," Braden said grandly, "is to play a beautiful game." He lifted his hands and shrugged, his face breaking into a beatific smile. "Why would I want to win anything other than a beautiful game?" Okay. A blindfolded baby fighting Mike Tyson. I like that one. That was the end of that chapter. That was a nice short one. My cat is just in heaven, kneading on a blanket right now. Not Louie, but the other one, Bagheera, who never comes on camera. He looks like a giant baby over there. Come here, Batty. Okay. Chapter 66. Within easy reach. Later that evening, I sat alone in what I guessed might be my drawing room. Or perhaps my sitting room. Honestly, I wasn't entirely sure what the difference was. I was surprised to find I liked my new rooms quite a lot. Not for the extra space, not because they had a better view of the garden, not because the inlay in the marble floor was more pleasing to the eye, not even because the room had its own exceptionally well-stocked wine cabinet, though that was quite pleasant. No, my new rooms were preferable because they had several cushioned, armless chairs that were perfect for playing my lute. It's uncomfortable to play for any length of time in a chair with armrests. In my previous room, I usually ended up sitting on the floor. Yeah, that is Animal Crossing. That's a very good point. I decided to dub the room with the good chairs my lutery. Or perhaps my performatory. I would need a while to come up with something suitably pretentious. Needless to say, I was pleased by the recent turn of events. By way of celebration, I opened a bottle of fine, dark Phaloran wine, relaxed, and brought out my lute. I started... What are you doing? Oh, you're just getting comfy? You're just getting comfy. Oh, my baby's on my lap. What are you doing? Okay. I don't know what he's doing. He's being weird. You're distracting me, buddy. Where was I? I started quick and tripping, playing my way through Tintitatornin? No, Tintitatornin. That one again. Remember that one? Tintitatornin. Started playing my way through that to limber up my fingers. Then I played sweet and easy for a time, slowly growing reacquainted with my lute. By the time I'd played for about half a bottle, I had my feet up and my music was mellow and content as a cat in a sunbeam, or a cat on my lap, curling himself into all these different positions and making my whole setup shake because he can't get comfortable when he's meowing. What do you want? That's when I heard the noise behind me. Now he's leaving. No, he's not. I don't know what he's doing. He keeps changing positions, like wiggling around and squirming. I stopped. Okay, that's when I heard the noise behind me. I stopped in a jangle of notes and sprang to my feet, expecting Cauticus or the guards or some other deadly trouble. What I found was the mayor, smiling an embarrassed smile, like a child that's just played a joke. "I trust your new rooms are to your satisfaction?" My cat has not had any wine. Oh, he's just like that. He's just crazy. Now he's licking me. He's just out of the camera hole. He's at the very bottom of the frame. There he is. It's his face. Okay. Anyway, now he's leaving. Okay. I collected myself and made a small bow. It's rather much for the likes of me, Your Grace. It's rather little, considering my debt to you, Alvaron said. He sat on a nearby couch and made a gracious gesture, indicating I should feel free to take a seat myself. What was that you were playing just now? I returned to my chair. It wasn't really a proper song, Your Grace. I was just playing. The mayor raised an eyebrow. It was one of your own devising? I nodded, and he motioned to me. I'm sorry to have interrupted you. Please, continue. What would you like to hear, Your Grace? I have it on good report that Meluan Lackless is fond of music and sweet words, he said, something along those lines. There are many types of sweet, Your Grace, I said. I played the opening to Violet Bide. The notes rang out light and sweet and sad. Then I changed to the Lay of Sir Savian, my fingers moving quickly through the complex chording, making it sound every bit as hard as it was. Alvaron nodded to himself, his expression growing more satisfied as he listened. And you can compose as well? I nodded easily. I can, Your Grace, though it takes time to do such things properly. How much time? I shrugged. A day or 2 or 3, depending on the sort of song you desire. Letters are easier. The mayor leaned forward. It pleases me that Thrape's praise was not exaggerated, he said. I will admit I moved you to these rooms with more than gratitude in mind. A passage connects them to my own rooms. We will need to meet frequently in order to discuss my courting. It should prove most convenient, Your Grace, I said, then chose my next words carefully. I've learned her family's history, but that will only go so far toward courting a woman. Alvaron chuckled. You must take me for a fool, he said gently. I know you'll need to meet her. She will be here in 2 days, visiting with a host of other nobility. I have declared a month of festivities to celebrate the passing of my long illness. Clever, I complimented him. He shrugged. I'll arrange something to bring the 2 of you together early on. Is there anything you require for the practice of your art? A goodly amount of paper should suffice, Your Grace, ink and pens. Nothing more than that? I have heard tell of poets who need certain extravagancies to aid them in their composition. He made an inarticulate gesture. A specific type of drink or scenery. I've heard of a poet quite famous in Renair who has a trunk of rotting apples he keeps close at hand. Whenever his inspiration fails him, he opens it and breathes the fumes they emit. I laughed. I am a musician, Your Grace. Leave the poets to their superstitious bone-rattling. All I need is my instrument, 2 good hands, and a knowledge of my subject. The idea seemed to trouble Alvaron. Nothing to aid your inspiration? I would have your leave to freely wander the estates and Severn Low according to my will, Your Grace. Of course. I gave an easy shrug. In that case, I have everything I need for inspiration within easy reach. I had barely set foot on Tinnery Street when I saw her. With all the fruitless searching I had done over the last several months, it seemed odd that I should find her so easily now. Denham moved through the crowd with slow grace. Not the stiffness that passes for grace in courtly settings, but a natural leisure of movement. A cat does not think of stretching, it stretches, but a tree does not even do this. A tree simply sways without the effort of moving itself. That is how she moved. I caught up to her as quickly as I could without attracting her attention. Excuse me, miss. She turned. Her face brightened at the sight of me. Yes? I would never normally approach a woman in this way, but I couldn't help but notice that you have the eyes of a lady I was once desperately in love with. What a shame to love only once, she said, showing her white teeth in a wicked smile. I've heard some men could manage twice, or even more. I ignored her jibe. I am only a fool once. Never will I love again. Her expression turned soft, and she laid her hand lightly on my arm. You poor man! She must have hurt you terribly. 'Struth, she wounded me more ways than one. But such things are to be expected, she said matter-of-factly. How could a woman help but love a man so striking as yourself? I know not, I said modestly, but I think she must not, for she caught me with an easy smile, then stole away without a word. Like dew in dawn's pale light. Like a dream upon waking, Denna added with a smile. Like a fairy maiden slipping through the trees. Denna was silent for a moment. She must have been wondrous indeed to catch you so entire, she said, looking at me with serious eyes. She was beyond compare. Oh, come now. Her manner changed to jovial. We all know that when the lights are out, all women are the same height. She gave a rough chuckle and ribbed me knowingly with an elbow. Not true, I said with firm conviction. "Well," she said slowly, "I guess I'll have to take your word for it." She looked back up at me. "Perhaps in time you can convince me." I looked into the deep brown of her eyes. "That has ever been my hope." Denna smiled, and my heart stepped sideways in my chest. "Maintain it." She slid her arm inside the curve of mine and fell into step beside me. "For without hope, what do any of us have?" Let's see. One more? We definitely have time for one more. Get some water. Chapter 67, Telling Faces. I spent a fair portion of the next 2 days under Stapes' tutelage, ensuring I knew the proper etiquette for a formal dinner. Sorry, my nose. I was already familiar with a great deal of it from my early childhood, but I was glad for the review. Customs differ from place to place and year to year, and even small missteps can lead to great embarrassment. So Stapes conducted a dinner for just the two of us, then informed me of a dozen small but important mistakes I had made. Setting down a dirty utensil was considered crude, for example. That meant it was perfectly acceptable to lick one's knife clean. In fact, if you didn't want to dirty your napkin, it was the only seemly thing to do. It was improper to eat the entirety of a piece of bread. Some portion should always be left on the plate, preferably more than crust. The same was true of milk. The final swallow should always remain in the glass. The next day, Stapes staged another dinner, and I made more mistakes. Commenting on the food wasn't rude, but it was rustic. The same was true of smelling the wine, and apparently the small, soft cheese I'd been served possessed a rind any civilized person would have recognized as inedible and meant to be pared away. Barbarian that I am, I had eaten all of it. It had tasted quite nice, too. Still, I took note of this fact and resigned myself to throw away half of a perfectly good cheese if it was set in front of me. Such is the prize of civilization. I arrived for the banquet wearing a suit of clothes tailored just for the occasion. The colors were good for me, leaf green and black. There was too much brocade for my taste, but tonight I made a grudging bow to fashion as I would be seated to the left of Meluan Lackless. Stapes had staged 6 formal dinners for me in the last 3 days, and I felt prepared for anything. When I arrived outside the banquet hall, I expected the hardest part of the evening would be feigning interest in the food. But while I might have been prepared for the meal, I was not prepared for the sight of Meluan Lackless herself. Luckily, my stage training took hold, and I moved smoothly through the ritual motion of smiling and offering my arm. She nodded courteously, and we made our procession to the table together. There were tall candelabra with dozens of candles. Engraved silver pitchers held hot water for hand bowls and cold water for drinking glasses. Old vases with elaborate floral arrangements sweetened the air. Cornucopia overflowed with polished fruit. Personally, I found it gaudy, but it was traditional, a showcase for the wealth of the host. Yeah, just waste food. That's what rich people do. Just doesn't matter. I walked the Lady Lackless to the table and held out her chair. Not her hair, her chair. I had avoided looking in her direction as we walked the length of the room, but as I helped her into her seat, her profile struck me with such strong resemblance that I couldn't help but stare. I knew her, I was certain of it, but I couldn't for the life of me remember where we might have met. As I took my seat beside her, I tried to guess where I might have seen her before. If the Lackless lands weren't 1,000 miles away, I would have thought I knew her from the university, but that was ridiculous. The Lackless heir wouldn't study so far from home. My eyes wandered over maddeningly familiar features. Might I have met her at the Aeolian? That didn't seem likely. I would have remembered. She was strikingly lovely, with a strong jaw and dark brown eyes. I'm sure if I'd seen her there. Do you see aught that interests you? She asked without turning to look at me. Her tone was pleasant, but accusation lay not far beneath the surface. I had been staring. Hardly a minute at table, and I was already putting my elbow in the butter. I beg your pardon, but I am a keen observer of faces, and yours struck me. Meluan turned to look at me, her irritation fading a bit. Are you a Turagior? Turagiors claim to be able to tell your personality or future from your face, eyes, and shape of your head. Pure-blooded vintage superstition. I dabble a bit, m'lady. Really? What does my face tell you, then? She looked up and away from me. I made a show of looking over Meluan's features, taking note of her pale skin and artfully curled chestnut hair. Her mouth was full and red without the benefit of any paint. The line of her neck was proud and graceful. I nodded. I can see a piece of your furniture... I can see a piece of your future in it, milady. One of her eyebrows went up a bit. Do tell. You will be receiving an apology shortly. Forgive my eyes, they flit like calanthus, place to place. I could not keep them from your fair flowered face. Milluin smiled, but she did not blush. Not immune to flattery, but no stranger to it either. I tucked that bit of information away. That was a fairly easy fortune to tell, she said. See you, anything else? I took another moment to search her face. 2 other things, milady. It tells me you are a Milluin Lackless, and that I am at your service. She smiled and gave me her hand to kiss. I took hold of it and bowed my head over it. I didn't actually kiss it, as would have been proper back in the Commonwealth. Instead, I pressed my lips briefly onto my own thumb that held her hand. Actually kissing her hand would have been terribly forward in this part of the world. Our banter was stalled by the arrival of the soups, 40 servants placing them before 40 guests all at once. I tasted mine. Why in God's name would anyone make a sweet soup? I ate another spoonful and pretended to enjoy it. From the corner of my eye, I watched my neighbor, a tiny older man I knew to be the Viceroy of Banis. His face and hands were wrinkled and spotted, his hair a disarrayed tousle of gray. I watched him put a finger into his soup without a hint of self-consciousness, taste it, then push the bowl aside. He rummaged in his pockets and opened his hand to show me what he'd found. I always bring a pocketful of candy almonds to these things, he said in a conspiratorial whisper, his eyes as cunning as a child's. You never know what they'll try to feed you. He held his hand out. You can have one if you like. I took one, thanked him, and faded from his awareness for the rest of the evening. When I glanced back several minutes later, he was eating unabashedly from his pocket and bickering with his wife about whether or not the peasantry could make bread from acorns. From the sound of it, I guessed it was a small piece of larger argument that they had been having their entire lives. To Milluin's right, there was a Yiddish couple chatting away in their own lilting language. Combined with strategically placed decorations that made it difficult to see the guests on the other side of the table, Milluin and I were more alone than if we had been walking together in the gardens. The mayor had arranged his seating well. The soup was taken away and replaced with a piece of meat I assumed was pheasant covered in a thick cream sauce. I was surprised to find it quite to my taste. So how do you think we came to be paired? Milluin asked conversationally. Mr. Kvoth. I made a small seated bow. It could be because the mayor wished you to be entertained, and I am at times entertaining. Quite. Or it could be I paid the steward an incredible sum of money. Her smile flickered again as she took a drink of water. Enjoys boldness, I thought to myself. I wiped my fingers and almost set the napkin on the table, which would have been a terrible mistake. That was a signal to remove whatever course was currently being served. Done too soon, it implied a silent but scathing criticism of the host's hospitality. I felt a bead of sweat begin to trickle down my back between my shoulder blades as I deliberately folded the napkin and laid it on my lap. So how do you occupy yourself, Mr. Kvoth? She hadn't asked me as to my employment, which meant she assumed I was a member of the nobility. Luckily, I had already laid the groundwork for this. I write a bit, genealogies, a play or two. Do you enjoy the theater? Occasionally, depending. I was caught in 2021. Past tense. Depending on the play? Depending on the performers, she said, an odd tension in touching her voice. I wouldn't have noticed it if I hadn't been watching her so closely. I decided to change the subject to safer ground. How did you find the roads on your way to Severin? I asked. Everyone loves to complain about the roads. It's as safe a topic as the weather. I heard there has been some difficulty with bandits to the north. I hoped to excite the conversation a little. The more she talked, the better I could get to know her. The roads are always thick with Rue bandits this time of year, Milluin said coldly. Not just bandits. Rue bandits. She said the word with such a weight of cold loathing in her voice that I was chilled to hear it. She hated the Rue. Not the simple distaste most people feel for us, but a true, sharp hate with teeth in it. I was saved from making a response by the arrival of chilled fruit pastries. To my left, the Viceroy argued acorns to his wife. To my right, Milluin slowly tore a strawberry pastry in half, her face pale as an ivory flask. Mask. Wow, I can't read. An ivory mask. Watching her flawless, polished nails tear the pastry into pieces, I knew her thoughts were dwelling on the Rue. Aside from her brief mention of the Edema Rue, the evening went quite well. I slowly set Milluin at her ease, talking casually of small things. The elaborate dinner lasted 2 hours, giving us ample time for discussion. I found her to be everything Alvaron had suggested, intelligent, attractive, and well-spoken. Even the knowledge that she loathed the Rue could not entirely keep me from enjoying her company. I returned to my room immediately after dinner and began to write. By the time the mayor came to call, I had 3 drafts of a letter, an outline of a song, and 5 sheets filled with notes and phrases I hoped to use later. "Come in, Your Grace." I glanced up as he entered. He hardly seemed the same sickly, doddering man I'd nursed back to health. He put on some weight and looked 5 years younger. "What did you think of her?" Alvaron said. "Did she mention any suitors when you spoke?" "No, Your Grace," I said, handing him a folded piece of paper. "Here is the first letter you will want to send her. I trust you can find a way of delivering it to her secretly." He unfolded it and began to read, his lips moving silently. I labored out another line of song, scratching out the chording alongside the words. Eventually the mayor looked up. "Don't you think this is a little much?" he said uncomfortably. "No." I paused in my writing long enough to gesture with my pen toward a different piece of paper. "That one is too much. The one in your hand is just enough. She's got a streak of romance in her. She wants to be swept from her feet, though she'd probably deny it." The mayor's expression was still doubtful, so I pushed myself away from the table and set down my quill. "Your Grace, you were right. She is a woman well worthy of pursuit. In a handful of days there will be a dozen men in the estates who would gladly take her to wife. Am I right?" How do you write? Oh my god, that's so good. How do you write? Like you're running out of time. "There are already a dozen here," he said grimly. "Soon there will be 3 dozen. Add another dozen she will meet at dinner or walking in the garden. Then another dozen who will court her merely for the chase. Of those dozens, how many will write her letters and poems? They will send her flowers, trinkets, tokens of affection. Soon she will be receiving a deluge of attention. You have one best hope." I pointed to the letter. "Act quickly. That letter will catch her imagination, her curiosity. In a day or 2, when the other notes are cluttering her desk, she will already be awaiting the second one of ours." He seemed to hesitate a moment, then his shoulders bowed. "Are you sure?" I shook my head. "There are no certainties in this, Your Grace, only hopes. That is the best one I can give you." Alvaron hesitated. "I know nothing of this," he said with a hint of petulance. "I wish there were some book of rules a man could follow." For a moment he looked very much like an ordinary man and very little like the Mayor Alvaron at all. Truthfully, I was more than slightly concerned myself. What I personally knew about courting women could comfortably fit... Okay. For a second I thought there was going to be an earthquake. I don't know what that was. What I personally knew about courting women could comfortably fit into a thimble without taking it off your finger first. On the other hand, I had a vast wealth of secondary knowledge. 10,000 romantic songs, plays, and stories taken all together had to be worth something. And on the negative side, I'd seen Simmon pursue nearly every woman within 3 miles of the university with the doomed enthusiasm of a child trying to fly. What's more, I had watched 100 men dash themselves to pieces against Denna like ships attempting to ignore the tide. Alvaron looked at me, his face still showing honest concern. "Will a month be enough time, do you think?" When I spoke, I was surprised by the confidence in my own voice. "Your Grace, if I cannot help you catch her in the space of a month, then it cannot be done." Alright, well, that was probably a good place to stop. Look at that. I think it looks like we're about halfway through it now. Maybe something close to that. Alright, well, I guess we will figure out the next day, next time, later. Thanks for listening and watching, and that was fun, as usual. Sorry about the internet outage that I had. I don't know if that... I hope you guys didn't miss anything. I don't think you did, or you would have said something, I would hope. Alright, well, you have a good night, and I'll talk to you guys later.